Today we're going to be mixing together Blue Velvet and Iris Purple from Lunar Tides. So happy Aquarius season. So I want to start off by saying that my swatches are human hair swatches, but the only one that's going to be virgin hair is the number 4 black swatch. The rest have been chemically colored or bleached at some point in their existence. 1 is green, 2 is gray, 3 is a natural red, 4 again is black. So 4 to 11 is a range that goes to a platinum blonde, and then number 12 is like a toned version of number 11. So with my mix videos, I like to do 2 separate mixes on each swatch. So on the top will be one mix, and then on the bottom will be a secondary mix. I usually like the top one to go a little bit darker. So we're gonna start with our first mix, which is a 1:8 ratio. So that is 1 part Blue Velvet to 8 parts Iris Purple. So Aquarius season is roughly going to be between January 19th and February 18th, but that can change year to year, which is why you always just see estimate dates for everything. So if you're unsure of what your sign is, you can actually go on a website like astro.com. As long as you have your birth time as well, you can make a birth chart, otherwise known as a natal chart made. And if you look at the sun sign, that will tell you what sign you are. I think in 2022, I want to say Aquarius season starts around 8 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone, which is my time zone. But hypothetically, if you were born January 19th, but maybe you're born around noon, that would mean you are still a Capricorn and not an Aquarius, which is really cool in my opinion. For the second part, we are going to do a 1:12 ratio. So that is, again, 1 part of the Blue Velvet to 12 parts of Iris. So Aquarius is an air sign, and it is ruled by Saturn in ancient astrology and Uranus in modern astrology. We've learned in other air sign videos that the element of air is usually represented by more pastels like lighter blues and purples and pinks, sometimes white and gray. And then the most popular color I saw crop up for Uranus was blue. So I thought we'd kind of lean into that. And to me, the cooler tone blues really represent both air and Aquarius kind of as one unit. So I wanted to go with that. Blue Velvet is pretty pigmented, so essentially all I'm doing in this case is using the Iris as a diluter because it's so much lighter in comparison to the Blue Velvet, but it's nice because it keeps the Blue Velvet looking quite cool toned versus when you lighten Blue Velvet on its own, it does pull a little bit more green. So this might be a good alternative for anyone who's looking to combat that. To really let my hair absorb the color, I'm gonna let these sit for 3 hours. I will then rinse them out, and when they're dry, I will meet you back here and we'll do some comparisons. So before we get too into this, I wanna say that I have a code with Lunar Tides. You can use code FLOXY for 15% off, but this is an affiliate code, so I do make a small commission every time the code is used, but of course that goes right back into my channel. So we have a problem. Normally, I like the top half of my swatches to appear darker than the bottom half when I'm doing mixes. It's just a method I use to keep myself on track to remember what's what, right? But as we can see, the top halves are not darker. And at first I thought maybe I mixed up my bowls, but for both mixes I had to make more in the middle of me applying. So usually I think around like 6 or 7 I have to finish my bowl, and then I'll make more and use the rest on the rest of the swatch. This is what happened for both mixes. And unless I was like in La La Land, somehow it kind of seems like the mixes are opposite. Now there may be an explanation for that. I don't know if it's a good explanation or not, but what I was saying earlier in the video is that when you dilute the blue velvet, it kind of starts to have like a nice bluish green look. It's still very blue, but it doesn't stay as cool toned. And using something like iris to dilute it is going to keep it more cool tone looking. And I don't know if it's gonna look the same from your angle as it looks for me, but the top half for 7 and 8, like this, actually does pull a lot more green compared to the bottom halves. And I've said before in a handful of other videos that cool tones just on their own do not reflect light as well as warm tones. So warm tones are almost always going to look brighter than cool tones, even if they're at the same level. And so I'm kind of wondering if all of the cool tones from the iris really set in at the bottom and made it look darker, even though technically the dye is lighter than the blue velvet. I think I'm gonna have to go with that as the explanation. Because like I said, at first I thought I'd mix the bowls up and I was gonna go back into my video that I edited and switch the ratios around. And then I remembered that I mixed a second batch in the middle of filming separately from each side as well. So the only explanation is that that's just how the dye looks. So hopefully that makes sense. Sorry if that's confusing. I'm also confused. Because I will say too that the iris, even though in the container looks quite light, it did become very pigmented and a little bit darker when I did the video on its own. So it does kind of make sense when you start putting the pieces together. So as usual, please do a strand test if you're going to do this mix. And I'm sorry that it's not as well fleshed out as maybe my other videos are. I've never had this happen before. But it really does only make a difference on some of the swatches, like the green hair, there's a pretty big difference. And even maybe the browner swatches, from my perspective anyways, like I said, the bottom looks a little bit more cool toned, but I usually do like to give a warning that when it comes to brown hair or like light brown, dark blonde, there's no guarantee that colors will stick to your hair. So you may put this in and then like next time you go to wash your hair, it could just come right out. And for like 9, 10, 11, and 12, I feel like the bottoms and the tops don't look too wildly different from each other, which that kind of sucks too. I was hoping for a better range of mixes for this, but the universe decided otherwise, I guess. So I wanted to start by comparing this to Blue Velvet by itself so we could see the differences. This is comparable to number 12, number 11, number 10, and number 9. Okay, so hopefully you can see now what I'm talking about. When you dilute the Blue Velvet, it turns more into like a tropical oceany kind of blue. And on its own, it is quite dark, like the direct dye portion. So that was my intention, was to use the iris to kind of lighten up the Blue Velvet without those green tones coming through as much. And so the color I made kind of reminds me of like a blue pen, that very cool toned medium blue. So even though I didn't get the range that I was looking for, I did still get the goal of lightening up the Blue Velvet in a cool toned kind of way. And hopefully now you can see the difference and what I was talking about. I have done a handful of cool toned blues, so I picked the one that's the most similar to this, and that is Overtone in the color Extreme Blue. This is comparable to number 12, number 11, number 10, and number 9. So I kind of want to go through and dissect each swatch color in comparison. So on the number 12, I actually think I prefer the Overtone on a swatch that is already toned. I feel like the blue kind of shines a little bit more, whereas on here it's a little bit more dull looking, which if that's what you're going for, it's not ugly or anything like that. Just in comparison, what I think I like better between the two. And then we get to number 11, and I feel like my mix actually looks kind of more like the Overtone version of the toned one. You could see a lot more of the blue coming through. So overall, the Overtone Extreme Blue does take a little bit darker on the swatches directly. On the number 10 swatch, I actually like both. In fact, I feel like the Overtone is kind of a mix between my two mixes, but I like how it looks on both the swatches. And then number 9, I like mine a little bit more. I think because it's not quite as dark, so you can see the blue a little bit better. But I think if you're buying 2 Lunar Tides dyes versus 1 Overtone dye, it might be around the same price. Well, I guess with my code, it might make it a little bit cheaper for Lunar Tides, but then you'll get the convenience with the Overtone that you don't have to mix anything. So of course it's preference, but this is the most similar blue that I have. My other blues are either just a little bit too ashy or a little bit too green, just by a tiny bit. The next runner-up I would say that looks the most like this would be Blue Ruin from Good Dye Young, but that is the one that leans just a hair more green, kind of like the Blue Velvet. Alright, so now I'd like to get into the before and after clips. Those, as well as anything you see at the end of the video, will all be done in natural lighting. I hope this video helped. If you have a request, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do brands that do not test on animals. Thank you so much to my patrons. Thank you so much if you decide to use my code FLOXY at Lunar Tides. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.